All right. Hi, folks. Steven here. So let's see. This is going to be another one of our Pokemon music discussions, or discussing yet another side game, of course. Tonight it's going to be the music of Pokemon Ranger for the Nintendo DS, and should be around shortly. But just to give you a little bit of an overview of how this will go, if you haven't seen one of these before, this is sort of the raw version of our discussion without all the fun editing and audio tweaks you get in the podcast feed sometime probably later this year or early next when we finally get us out on the podcast feed. Ah, there she is. Hi. So let's see. But this is going to be a side game music discussion. We go over some history of the game. We talk about a variety of tracks. We do a little feedback section usually, and a few other things. If you have any comments on the music of the game or the game itself, because at the very end we do a bonus segment where we talk about the game itself and its mechanics and stuff like that. I think we're going to have some interesting things to say about this game mechanically. But that sort of is the lay of the land. Let's see. And before we go into the actual discussion, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, my name is Anne. I run a Pikapi Podcast, currently sporadically updated podcast about the Pokemon anime, going through kind of every single episode from start to finish to kind of give every single episode its due, discussing what happened in it, characters, progressions, as if they were a little bit more real than they are, discussing the writing and the storytelling and the life lessons we learn from this wonderful show, and also make fun of it sometimes in a good-natured way.
Yeah, sort of the anime tie-in is that we started off doing a discussion series comparing the Japanese and English ending themes of each of the Pokemon movies. We ran out of those, and we do the new ones when they come out, although we're still waiting for the dub of Secret to the Jungle. My suspicion is that if there is a theatrical component to the exhibition of that movie, they're waiting until the vaccines get approved for younger kids, and then hopefully a couple months after that, they can work something out. Is sort of their plan there, because they stand to make, whether they're doing this through Netflix or some other publisher or whatever, I think they stand to make a lot more money if they can do that. Even if it's a simultaneous release or something like that, they can make a fair bit of extra money that way, and parents will feel much better about taking their kids to the theater if they've been immunized. So let's see there. But yes, tonight what we are talking about is the last third generation side game, Pokemon Ranger for the DS. There's a fair bit of material to cover. We've done our usual thing where we pick out a bunch of songs and done some background research into the game and stuff like that. But with that kind of out of the way, Anne, are you just about ready to get the actual discussion started?
I am.
All right, let me go ahead
Start
and
recording here.
Yeah, so the way this works is I leave a bit of a pause. I do an introduction. I have some notes that serve as an outline for this. Along the way, we'll probably make some mistakes and redo some stuff. That is the fun of getting to watch us record this live. If you have any comments on the music of the game or the game itself, please do put those in the chat. We will try to work those in towards the end of our main discussion. And that is more or less what's going on there. So let me go ahead and hit record on my two recorders here. All right. Let's see here. Yeah, I think our levels look good. All right,
Yep,
so we're going to leave a little bit of a pause, and we're just going to take things from there. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast, and we've finally come around to the last of the third generation Pokemon side games. This is Pokemon Ranger for the DS. Don't worry, we have plenty of more things to discuss in the future, but this is the last side game of the third generation of Pokemon. let's see. Is that how I see? Like I said, we do make mistakes here. I'm just trying to see if that's how I want to go there. If I want to do a different introduction. Yeah, I think I'll do something a little bit different, and we have choices in editing. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And in our continuing series of Pokemon side game music discussions, we've reached the last side game of the Ruby and Sapphire or third generation. This is Pokémon Ranger for the Nintendo DS. There is technically a very small amount of Generation 4 content, but it was released before the Diamond and Pearl games were released. So it is a third generation side game, at least by our measure. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this particular game, it is a touchscreen-based DS game. Makes heavy use of the touchscreen, actually. Let's see. It was released in 2006 in most territories. It was released in Japan in March of 2006, North America in October of 2006, and Australia in December of 2006. Europe, it took until early 2007 in April. And in case you're curious, I'm sure a lot of you remember, there is a somewhat loose movie tie into this, the Pokemon Ranger Manaphy and the Temple of the Sea. I forget exactly which name there, but in case you're wondering, in Japan, that released in the summer of 2006, so obviously a couple months after this game came out. So it was sort of a loose promotional vehicle for that movie as well. If you want a copy of these games, you can, of course, buy them used, but if you do have a Wii U, they were all released on the Virtual Console. I know they came out in 2016, if I remember correctly, in the North American Virtual Console with other dates in other regions. But with those dates out of the way, let's kind of talk about the original experience we had. Anne, did you play this game back in the day? What was it like for you?
I did play it. I owned it for a while. I eventually sold it to basically get money for new games. We might talk about why as we talk about overall impressions of the gameplay later. But yeah, I have played this game and both loved and was frustrated by it in turn.
Yeah, if you've played the later Ranger games in the series, you may notice they made some pretty substantial mechanical changes that we'll talk about in our bonus segment. I know for a fact that I got this for Christmas of 2006. It actually was kind of a little bit extra special. In my family, at least through when me and my sister were in growing up and then all the way through when we were in college, we got to open up one present the night before Christmas as sort of an extra thing. And I'm almost certain this is the one I got that year. I got to open the night before Christmas. All the rest of the stuff was, of course, the actual day of Christmas. So this has a little bit of an extra memory for there. But I do know for a fact I did not beat this game when it originally came out. I did beat it on the Wii U Virtual Console a couple of weeks ago, and I think that might be the only way I would ever beat it. We'll talk more about that later. But I remember the game, and it didn't leave, even though I never finished it didn't leave a sour enough taste in my mouth that I skipped the sequels. I did play those. We'll talk about those maybe later this year, but definitely into next year when we get to them. But it was okay. I think it showed promise. I wasn't totally enthralled by it. I felt it had some definite issues. But let's kind of talk about how this game came about then. Let's see, not the best transition I can think of. But setting aside our feelings about the game emotionally or physically when we first played it, let's kind of talk about the production. This game was produced by two companies, both of which should be pretty familiar. One of them is HAL, which is actually best known for the Kirby series. I suspect that one of the reasons they worked on this is that some of the code and or other stuff is brought in from Kirby's Canvas Curse, which has a similar drawing mechanic that's used in that game. Of course, HAL is no stranger to Pokemon. They worked or supervised a lot of the stuff from the N64/Game Boy Color side game era. So they were involved with stuff like Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Stadium to varying degrees. Even Hey You Pikachu, they had a bit of a hand in, I think. Creatures Inc. is, I'm sure, I mean, they've been involved with Pokemon since the beginning. They were originally founded as a company called Ape Inc. and had some involvement with a number of things, notably the Earthbounder Mother series for the first 2 installments of that. They eventually got their name changed. And since then, they've worked on a variety. Normally, they do a lot of stuff with the Pokemon trading card game, but in this case, they were actually developers of an actual video game, and they've worked on a few other things. I think the game Detective Pikachu was also in their purview. They do a lot of modeling work. And did you have any other observations on these 2 companies? They're pretty well known here, but like I said, I did want to throw a few things out there.
Yeah, like I said, they're well known. We've talked about some of them a bit. No, I don't have much to add. I'm curious where they got the name Ape.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they changed it because of a trademark issue or something like that. That can happen sometimes too.
True.
But we also know who worked on the music for this one. We have 2 names. There's Takuto Kitsuda and Kinta Sato. Now, one of these folks we actually have a fair bit of information on, and that's Takuto. Speaking of the Earthbounder Mother series, apparently one of his earlier works was he worked on Mother 3, but not the Mother 3. Well, we never got it here in the States, which would have been like Earthbound 2 or whatever. But this was the original N64 disk drive Mother game that they eventually scrapped and eventually morphed significantly into the Game Boy Advance game that actually came out. As far as Pokemon, I have down that he worked on some of the stuff for the E-cards. These were the cards released late into the 2nd and early in the 3rd generation that had the little barcodes that you could scan on the e-reader. He's credited on Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and more recently he is credited, I believe, on music for the Detective Pikachu game, which has a distinct soundtrack from the Detective Pikachu movie, I should point out. I don't think there's much, if any, overlap there. Kinta Sato, not so lucky there. Doesn't really have too many other credits besides this game. There's a game design credit for something called Way of the Samurai 3. But find much else there. And what did you find on composers?
I have not much more than what you have. They're mostly known by their Pokemon credits. They're not terribly public. Unlike some of the previous people we've talked about, I couldn't even dig up their old Twitter accounts. So yeah, they're just quietly doing their thing. I did notice in the credits there is a special thanks to Hirokazu Tanaka, who we've talked about before. I don't know if that implies that maybe he had some influence on the soundtrack, or at least, they riffed off of previous things he's composed, perhaps. But I thought that was interesting to mention.
Well, he is, I forget if he's I think he moved over to Creatures Inc. On the time he started doing music for the Japanese version of the Pokemon anime, because previously he had worked at Nintendo, and they wouldn't allow him to do kind of both, so he kind of moved over to Creatures, and he does plenty of non-musical stuff there. And back when we had major Pokemon tournaments, you'd see him at Worlds, and if you knew where to look, and in one of the opening ceremony stuff. I'm not sure that he had anything specifically musically to do. I think that has kind of waned as time has gone on, but he is I forget if he's the chairperson or the president or what exactly there. He still does occasionally music stuff. But it's not surprising his name in there, since this is a Creatures co-developed game.
Hmm.
Well, let's kind of talk about the overall style of this game. And, 1 second. Excuse me. And if I had to describe the overall style, it seems like it's very much a marching band with a lot of brass and woodwinds type stuff. There is a fair amount of diversity. In fact, I actually think the songs that we've picked out for this discussion actually kind of stray away from that a fair bit, which is kind of interesting. but a lot of the overworld music and stuff is based around that motif. And would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. It's a lot of it is just, very big and punchy and like not necessarily dramatic, but kind of just big. And a lot of the tracks we picked are the ones that kind of veer off the beaten path a bit. I did really appreciate that there's a lot of varied instruments. I believe they all sound very like synth and sampled instruments, but like there is definitely not just one particular flavor. Like there is a whole orchestra of digital sounds, and that I thought was very interesting. It feels a little less full and rich than maybe some of the other scores we talked about, but like still is using a wide contingent and a wide variety of sounds, and that's very cool.
Yeah. Despite my statement earlier that I tried to narrow it down to a sentence, that does describe a good chunk of the music in this game. It by no means describes everything in it. But sort of like a lot of the Ranger themes do fit into that marching band type of quality with brass and woodwinds, the music that is specific to the Ranger characters. Some of the more exotic locations are a little bit are where things get a little bit, like you said, off the beaten path. All right, well, we did what we usually do. We each picked out 3 songs from this game. The ones I picked are the Olive Jungle, the Panula Cave. I'm not entirely sure I pronounced that. Apparently that is an actual real word, which is apparently some type of moth or something. We looked that up. And then Ending Story. Now, technically speaking, a lot of these are not official titles because there is no official soundtrack, as with most Pokemon side games. But hopefully that gives you enough idea. And what tracks did you pick?
I picked the Fiore Temple Peak, Drowsy Man, and Saving.
All right. Well, the way I have these laid out, looks like I'm going first this time. So the first one I picked, we try to go loosely in chronological order within the game, although that's not always possible, is the Olive Jungle. And what really caught my attention about this track is it's got 2 very distinct sections in there. We had sort of talked about a little bit of that with the Pokemon Coliseum and Gale of Darkness, how some of the stuff there has distinct sections. This one really does that. There's the first part, which is maybe more what you would expect from a jungle music track, where it's very busy. There are a lot of... They fit together for the most part, but they have... but very much something might jump out at you at any time type of jungle feel to it. And then there's a second part where it goes into this piano, I guess with a little bit of trilling. You can't really trill on a piano the same way you would on some other instruments, but it's got this grand scale as if you're looking over a big valley or something. I know I kind of covered both parts there. Anne, what were your kind of thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I really, well, I'm here for the bongos. Like, I really quite liked that, it's a stereotypical jungle-y vibe to use that instrument, but I really quite liked them. And I also liked that they kind of blended in some little chiptune-y trills in that first part, which is kind of, again, not what you'd expect for a jungle. So, like, they kind of combined, like, some very obvious instrument choices and some less so choices, and the whole thing kind of creates a vibe that's very fun and exciting and tropical, but also a little bit of danger maybe, or a little bit unsettling. And then the second part got very interesting. I like that it took you into different places over, it's kind of just a bit more, I don't know if grand is the right word, but like a little softer. Like, we're not having the bopping jungle time, but we're still experiencing a different side of the jungle.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. With the first part, it did kind of remind me of something. It reminded me of the music that's used for like the Bowser spaces in the original Mario Party. Melodically, it is different. The instrumentation actually kind of reminds me there. When I was replaying this game recently, and I got this track. When it got to the second part, at first I had to really listen to it because I was like, whoa, wait, is this the same track? Did I switch areas at a certain time? Because I thought this might be for a different part of the same area or something, but it just loops back and forth, which is kind of interesting. But one other thing we should mention with this track is that there's about 3 or 4 unused tracks in this game that people find by digging through the game files and whatnot. And there's actually a what is sort of called a Jungle Village track. Since it's an unused track, it's obviously very unofficial. I don't think we have any details on what happens here, but normally the jungle is just outside of a place called, I think it's Summerland or something like that. And if you listen to this unused track, it shares some of its stuff with the second part of this Olive Jungle track, which strongly suggests that the two are related. So I'm kind of wondering, based on that, was there a different city adjacent to this jungle originally? Was there going to be another city hidden inside the jungle on a side path or something? And any thoughts in that area?
I mean, it very well could be. That's interesting to think about. I mean, I would have loved that, another city to play in. But yeah, it kind of does suggest something to that degree.
Yeah, I didn't do it. I couldn't find any articles or stuff like that. It's like it may have been. It was obviously cut at some development or swapped for the more touristy Summerland place. But yeah, let's see. All right, well, Anne, let's talk about your first track. It's actually one of the shortest tracks we've ever talked about, although it can technically go on for a while. Potentially, not usually, though. This is the saving track, and it's a little more substantial than what we've seen in other Pokemon games. Why don't you describe this track a little bit and what made you choose it?
Yeah, so when I choose these tracks, I typically don't go for what my memories of them are. I like just kind of listen to the whole thing and just see what hits me. And for some reason, when I came across Saving, it really got to me. It's a very soothing track. Through this series, I'm starting to feel like I have a thing for soft synth instrumental bells. There's a lot of little arpeggiation kind of underneath the melody, which is really quite cool. And I feel like it's interesting that they decided to make this track, this loop, as long as it is, and have it be a full musical track for a process in the game of just saving your game that very often is just like a sound effect or something. So I thought it was just, really pretty. And I found myself wanting it to go on longer or wanting it to, develop into a full-fledged song. I thought it was very involved for something that most people don't pay a ton of attention to in, the music of a game.
Yeah, like the main series Pokemon games, and I think most of the side games as well, either don't have any particular sound for saving or it's just like a text box advancing. I can hear the little ditty that goes on in like the original games that indicates your save was successful, but this is something a little bit different. It is something through the things I have. There's a little bit of, I guess, a music box sound at the very beginning, and then it's followed by a little bit of swaying quality, I think, with the rest of it until the save actually finishes. But yeah, just kind of structurally speaking, it is a little different in that it does interrupt whatever music is playing at the time in whatever area you're in, which is not something we usually see, first of all, in games a lot. In fact, a lot of games, they have an autosave, so like you don't even hear anything. You just see the word saving at the bottom of the screen these days. This one, they really do call it out. I'm not sure how much intention there was in there or how that came about, but it was something I really wanted to note. And this song, like a couple others, is reused in the later Ranger games, so I thought that was another good reason to bring it up there. Anything to say about it, Anne?
I agree. Like, it's hard to tell what the thought process was for making this choice, but it is definitely a choice. And as I've always said, I support strong choices. And like I said, it's just a beautiful little surprising track.
Okay, well, That's on my second track. This is Pangula. I hope if I keep pronouncing it different ways, I'll eventually get it. If anyone does know the correct pronunciation, feel free to toss that in the chat or in a comment. But this is a cave, and not the first cave you go through. This is one you go through later in the game that is covered in ice. And you know, ice and snow segments within games, there are a couple different ways you can go. This one I had kind of a skating vibe with the way the sound goes. It's not like it's definitely not a holiday type of track. It's more of, I guess, kind of a lonely, like moving through a city in the middle of winter. It's also, to me, not quite the same as some of the stuff we get in the Crown Tundra DLC, which is sort of another major point of comparison for this. I don't know, Anne, what were your kind of thoughts on sort of this direction they went to with the ice level?
Well, I kind of thought it felt like with the flute melody, like just a little bit jazzy. And then would be contrasted because there's like the little flute melody and then a very percussive answering and kind of a back and forth for some of the track. Yeah, I don't know if I got the same vibe you did off of it, but I definitely felt it was an interesting choice because it doesn't necessarily evoke the stereotypical wintry sort of feelings, but yeah, maybe walking through a city in winter is a way to describe it. But it definitely feels like I am investigating something and kind of searching through a cave, and like there's that kind of the high flute noise and then the low dun, 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 that comes after. So it definitely has a bit of an exploration kind of vibe and an unknown vibe to it for me.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's inappropriate or anything. I think it
No,
makes
no.
a certain amount of sense that it goes in a different direction than, sort of the holiday direction or even like I said, in the Crown Tundra. So I kind of do like this. Some of the comments I read on this, though, that although this track is relatively peaceful, there are a lot of noisy, disruptive Pokemon in this area of the game, some that move around quite quickly. So it is a little bit of a jarring transition or whatever you want to say there. So
Interesting.
I'm not sure if that was your experience. I mean, I did play through this game, and I kind of have to agree with that. So, not sure if that brought up anything for you, Anne.
Well, I'd kind of forgotten, but now that you mention it, like, yeah.
Yeah. So there's even it has to fit a lot of different stuff that's in there too. There's a segment where, excuse me. It has to fit a lot of different stuff in there. There's a segment where you're sort of automatically moving down and you have to avoid holes to get to somewhere in there and stuff. And it has to fit all of that as well as things where you're searching out certain Pokemon to return them to their group. Like you have to get like a Swinub or something like that. Which sort of does, means you don't want to go in. Sort of guides the direction you want to go, but the skating was sort of the part I wanted to get in there. Is that there is a little bit of a gliding sound effect, which I guess maybe goes to that slide portion there. Okay, and let's talk about your second song. This is the Fiore Temple Peak. Fiore, by the way, is the name of the region where this game takes place. This is an interesting one. I get some ideas of why you picked it. Why don't you fill us in?
Yeah, well, it just there's two tracks, the Fiore Temple and the Fiore Temple Peak, and they're so very completely different from one another. But to describe this song, like it's very organ heavy. That's the primary instrument in this track, and like these giant chords, and just add a level of seriousness to it that I thought was very interesting. And it's somehow not necessarily evocative of being on a mountain peak or like, kind of what I expected from it, but it's very grand and it's very lofty and it's, yeah. And I don't recall an organ being used at any other point in the soundtrack. So it kind of stood out to me in that way as well. I might be wrong, but I don't recall.
You are a little bit wrong. This song
Okay,
itself,
I know.
a shorter version of it that's missing a section or two, is used earlier in the game when you're going through
Ah.
one of the enemy bases. Because this particular version of the song is you're confronting the agitator or evil character of this game when you go. I believe his name is. Gorder or something like that. I forget exactly how it's pronounced.
Oh, right. So we're following on his theme rather than it being a location theme. I see what's going on.
It sort of is. It's sort of the theme for the entire organization.
Hmm.
It's kind of interesting. We have not mentioned the evil team yet, the Go Rock Squad that is in this game yet, but their leader, so to speak, you see him early in the game, but you meet up with him for the final confrontation here. Sorry, spoiler. And to be honest, the organ aspect of it reminds me of a couple things. I put down the word menacing rather than evil, but first of all, it reminds me a couple discussions ago when we did our insert a Pokemon song into the actual movie. We talked about I Am a Collector from the Japanese version of the second Pokemon movie, and this has a little bit of that vibe to it. Although I think it's a little more old school menacing organ than Android Weber Phantom of the Opera. And it's also maybe got a little bit of organ themes from various RPGs or even like the Castlevania series or stuff like that. It's not as dark as it could be, especially given sort of the tone of the overall game. But that's sort of how it presents itself. Any follow-ups to that, Anne?
Well, just having this discussion, it kind of makes me think like how often in a movie or a piece of media, the bad guy plays the organ. Like I'm thinking like Barbossa from the Pirates movies, and like you brought up Phantom of the Opera. Like just the organ for some reason, just feels like it's often associated with the villain or at least the misunderstood character. Is very rarely it's not usually something that evokes the plucky young heroine or the good guys. The organ tends to be something that the villains are more associated with. When you hear those sounds, it's big, it's dramatic, it's the bad guys arrived. So that's an interesting I don't know, shade to this, I guess.
Yeah, insert Ganondorf. I think it's Ocarina of Time where he's playing an organ. There might be other Zelda
Yes.
games as well.
Yes.
But reference here, so definitely well worn both within video games and film, and probably some other things as well. But yeah, it basically leads you into sort of the final confrontation where you have to capture some very difficult Pokemon to complete the game. And speaking of completing the game, let's go on to my third song that I picked here. This is the ending story. Now, there's a couple parts to the ending. There's this part. There's a part where all the heroes come together, and of course, there's the end credits. This is sort of the first part of that where we have kind of spoiled a little bit of the ending. I'll try not to say too much here, but there's one of the mentor characters in the game comes across a villain character who has fled the scene of the final battle and with. Basically, the sort of animating factor for the villain in this game is that grudge against the mentor character in the game goes a long way back. And as a result, ones there is they have a change there, and it kind of flexes. It's so low, and piano is instrument. Usually, the left hand is playing the lower register, the right hand is playing the register. I hope I didn't that backwards, otherwise, because that's real sad if I did. Although the two parts fit together, they are decidedly separate. They don't join up. They don't really meet with one another, and I think it's sort of fitting for the exchange. Defeated villain is sort of like fairly unrepentant, and so trying to, I guess, move on from there. All the problems he caused in the game, which is kind of interesting. I don't know, Anne, what did you think of this track?
Um, I don't know if I quite picked out the same metaphor you did, but that's really quite beautiful. But yeah, it's a very emotional track. Um, you can tell that this track is something a little bit different and special from some of the other loops that it feels like this is a piano piece that's telling a story. And I really love that about it.
Yeah. There's also a very contemplative aspect to it, especially since these are two older
Mm.
characters within the games, two that have a history there, that are, for various reasons. There's an in-story reason that it makes sense that they are passing by each other, so it's not as if it's coming out of nowhere. Um, so that does kind of make sense. Any other thoughts on this one?
No, I think that does it. It's just very lovely.
Yeah. Well, there is a post game in here in this game. There's actually not as much as there would be in some of the other ones, but there's definitely some post game stuff you can go through. One of those definitely has its own music track. It's called "The Drowsy Man," and this is your third pick. What kind of stood out here?
Okay, so yeah, the drowsy man, the guy who lets you relive your most memorable capture, dude. He like I really just thought there was something kind of unique about this track. There's a lot going on. Kind of it sounds like a very soft and you're getting sleepy type sound, and then there's like a clarinet or something, some wind instrument, some very low wind instrument notes going on underneath as just an undercurrent that keeps you just a little bit unsettled. So it's got a very hypnotic feel to it. You kind of get a sense of like a spiral or being slowly taken over or something. um so I just thought it was a very clever little piece of instrumentation there.
Yeah, going back to what I said about the saving music, this has a swing quality, but a very different vibe going through it. Definitely much more hypnotic, a little bit confusing and stuff like that. But for the game mechanic where they're having you, giving you an opportunity to rebattle some stuff that you did earlier that would otherwise not be possible, giving you sort of an in-universe explanation for why that's happening is, I think, an appropriate track there. I don't know that they've done much of anything else. I mean, Drowsy itself is elsewhere in the game as a capturable Pokemon that you can use for assist, but this is a very specific character who has a couple Drowsy, who is used as a bit of a, I don't know, plot device probably isn't quite the right word, but sort of an in-universe explanation for something there, which is
Mm.
always kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we give our overall opinion on the music for this game? So, what I put down for this is it's not as, last time around we did the original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, Red Rescue Team, Blue Rescue Team, and that is a hard standard to live up to. Even the original ones in there had some pretty well made things. But I still found this one to be fitting. It has some good variety. Like I said, despite my attempt to narrow it down to one sentence, which I kind of regret a little bit, um, but it's generally well composed. They knew what they were doing and what they were going for, and they more or less executed on that. And what are your sort of thoughts there?
um Overall, it's very nice. Like there are a lot of tracks on here that I would put on like a playlist of game music. There's something about it that about the sound, it like just the general sound itself that feels very game like video game quotes, video game music. I think that comes a lot from the fact that I do believe these are all synth instruments that um, the orchestration doesn't feel as full and lush as, say, you actually had like an orchestral rendering of these tracks. But there's so much interesting little things going on in the score, like both from little notes and melodies and trills, the choices of instruments, that I really think it's a disservice not to recognize the talent in creating it. I would love to just listen to, say, an orchestral rendering with like a live orchestra of some of these tracks, because I feel like they could be more than they are, but like there is definitely a lot of well thought out choices going into this composition.
Yeah, so certainly not a bad effort. I think it does have a couple standout tracks. Definitely a thumbs up from me on this. It may not be it has some difficult things to live up to. Like I said, it's not quite up there with the Mystery Dungeon games, but good work, and it works well for this particular game. All right, well, I have a little bit of feedback to go over, so 1 second here while I boot that up. All right, well, time to move on to some feedback from some stuff that I recently posted as we're recording this to my channel. So, a few weeks ago, before we recorded this, I unboxed what, to the best of my knowledge, is the only Japanese official Pokemon music cassette. So, this is the Together with the Wind single. Now, if you're for some reason not familiar with that, Together with the Wind is the Japanese ending theme of the first Pokemon movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. And yes, casingle is not a word I made up. It is the term usually for a single song on each side cassette, although this has two on each side. There are, it's the only other one I can think of in the Pokemon realm is on the English side. There is a casingle for Don't Say You Love Me. But this, so far as I know, is the only Japanese one. One of our good friends, Lapras GD, also picked up a copy of this a ways back on Yahoo, which tends to be more popular in Japan. And as far as that individual knows, it is the only Japanese Pokemon cassette release. Not sure why. I mean, cassettes were kind of fading out by that time, regardless of territory. It is maybe a little bit surprising I don't know of one for Aim to be a Pokemon Master, which would have been around the same time, of course. Cassettes definitely existed in Japan. And you spent more time in Japan than I did, although it was after cassette had their day.
Yeah.
But do you have any thoughts on just why this might be the only one?
I mean, basically everything I'm going to say is speculation based on things I actually saw. But I spent a lot of time when I was in Japan, cassettes had basically gone the way of the world. They were not front and center in the stores. I spent a lot of time digging through old bargain bins and the shops, the sketchy shops and bodegas under the train tracks and stuff where you can find all the old relics. I honestly don't remember seeing a single cassette tape in any of those little quarter bins of, bygone thrift store type music. Which I think suggests to me, again, only my observation, that, probably CDs were very early adopted. And certainly knowing how Japan, when a single is released, it's a big deal, the packaging of a single, a CD single, and the stuff that comes with it, it suggests to me that that the CD technology was not only very quickly adopted, but they very quickly figured out how to make that special. And knowing my American, or rather my Canadian experience of I bought cassette tapes rather than CDs for the longest time because they were cheaper. And I got we were noticing Totally Pokemon had a cassette tape that I owned. For as long as I could hold out to buy cassette tapes rather than CDs. I did for that reason because I was a little broke girl. But it's knowing how Japan like has just excelled at like the marketing of CDs and singles, and especially like they can often persuade fans to buy several different versions of a single, and like collect all four of basically the same single depending on how they're packaged. Like that's an industry Japan has done a lot in their marketing over the years. It strikes me that possibly due to all of those reasons, like maybe cassettes took a back seat when you could get this brand new shiny product for emotional reasons, rather than necessarily just going for the cheaper option. That's something to consider. Like I said, it's all hearsay based on some things I observed in like 2007. So who knows what the truth is on that? I certainly don't.
Yeah, I mean, I do know, I'm pretty sure that CD adoption in Japan was really relatively quick. And I do know for almost a fact that Japan had a pretty good uptake of the Laserdisc format. If you even don't know what those are, they look like big, like record-sized CDs. And what they had video encoded on them, technically analog, unlike CDs that are digital, but that had a big uptake in Japan compared to like in the West, where it was a very hi-fi format. It wasn't until DVDs came out in the late 90s and early 2000s that we got a disc video format that was big here in the West. But cassettes, they definitely existed. Maybe they were more a recording format like they were also. But maybe this one movie was just big enough that they decided to make this. It wasn't made in quantities, I can tell you that much. But yeah, a little bit of history. I suppose you mentioned that you had bought cassettes because they were cheaper, which was definitely true here in the States as well. I know we also had cassettes here for a while. It's because it was pretty uncommon to have a car that could have a CD player for well into the 90s. I'm trying to think when our family finally got it. It might have been towards the end of the 90s, and prior to that, we still had a car that had a cassette player, and I had one while I was in college that had a cassette player, although you had those little headphone jack to cassette adapters. They still make for stuff like if you have a really old car and you need to connect
Right.
like your phone to it to play music. I don't know. Anne, did you have any other cassette memories you wanted to share here?
No, I'm thinking like, when was the last time I could buy a CD player that didn't also have a cassette deck? Like I'm trying to remember the exact moment in my life where like the cassettes phased out. Because like I said, I was a cheap person who always bought things secondhand, so like I held on to that lifestyle for a long time. But
Well,
yeah,
I because digital voice recorders didn't become affordable until well into the zeros for field interviews, I often used a portable cassette recorder up through about 2005, 2006. Like, if you want to look back on my channel, my interview with Elliot Sloan from Blessed Union of Souls was recorded on cassette. I think that's one of the few ones from the pre-YouTube era that I've bothered to put on there. Just because that was kind of an important one, as you can kind of imagine. I was just fortunate that they did a concert at my college, and I was able to get an interview with Elliot, which was really a lot of fun. But that is actually recorded on cassette tape. A year or so later, I would finally get one of those digital voice recorders, which didn't even go up to full CD quality, but eventually sort of worked my way up from there.
no, that's right. Yeah, I had a portable voice recorders for my acting stuff, and it was on cassette because that one was way cheaper. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, usually the way things go when they go digital is at the very beginning of the digital rollout, the digital version is much more expensive, but in the end, the digital one ends up becoming cheaper or about as cheap as the analog was in its heyday.
Mm-hmm.
Because, they still make recordable CDs and stuff like that, and you can get those for less than $1 each. But yeah, I think that concludes the hipster portion of this discussion. One thing I asked is there's usually an annual cassette celebration day. It's going through some changes because of some problems they've run into. But cassettes still exist, and by the way, I do bring them out to events. Once we start having those again, you can ask me for a promotional cassette, and I will actually have some of those along with CDs and flyers. But I did want to toss that one in there. That was kind of a fun thing to throw in here. All right. Well, what is our next discussion? Well, like we said, this is the last Gen 3 side game. And usually between generations, we like to do a little bit of a one-off or a different type of discussion. And so our next discussion before we start the Gen 4 side games is going to be deconstructed Pokemon songs. So let me kind of explain what that is. If you're watching this live, you can see a little bit of a plug-in control that I have in my installation of Audacity. But basically what this is, what we're going to be doing is, this has kind of been around for a while, but it's gotten a little more advanced as time has gone on, is we're going to be using software to remove the vocals that are like center panned in most tracks, and sort of listening to some of the background elements and some of the backing elements of various things. We won't be able to play them on here, but it's something you can do at home if you have the right plugin for this and just know a little bit about how to bring in audio there. But we're sort of going to be listening to some of the background elements of various Pokemon songs. We'll probably be avoiding some of the ones that have commercially available karaoke tracks, which actually eliminates a fair bit of the Japanese side, which tend to do that much more than the English side. But we're sort of see what we can find there. I've tried this with the number one. Some ones are more interesting than others. A few ideas of which one to talk about, but and you'll be able to pick out of the order as well. I'm looking forward to that. I don't know about you, Anne, but
yeah, this is gonna be fun. I've already got some ideas percolating, so we'll see which ones make the cut.
But yeah, that'll be our intergenerational discussion. Obviously, the first side game of Gen 4 will be after that. That's Pokemon Revolution for the Wii. But look forward to that. Until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
This has been all right. Thanks. Okay. That's there. And there we stop screen. No screen anymore. There we go. It takes our streaming solution here a little bit of time to adjust it. We'll get a little drink of water, but we're going to do a game discussion, and we're going to have some things to say Pokemon Ranger. It's not the worst Pokemon side game out there, but there's definitely some things that, at least I think, and Anne agrees, they improved in the later two games in this series. We'll also discuss the actual movie tie-in, Pokemon Ranger, back a couple of years ago when we were going through the movies. We'll probably briefly mention as well as some of the other marketing push this game got in. Just give it a second, and we'll start our bonus segment. Feel free to share any comments you have with that. All right, well, time to talk about the game Pokemon Ranger in terms of like game mechanics and some other things I've noted here. So if you've seen Ranger in other media, you know what they do. They have this thing called the capture styler, and you spin it around the Pokemon, and eventually you capture it, but not in the same sense you do in the main series games. You have at your disposal to use for various in the game, either to help capture or calm other Pokemon, or to clear certain obstacles and stuff like that. And the overworld stuff tends to work fairly well, but the main difference mechanically between this and the other Ranger games is in this first entry, you have to get all the loops without picking up your stylus, and if you accidentally hit the Pokemon, or the Pokemon attacks your line, or you accidentally lift up the stylus, or whatever, you're going back to start with whatever the maximum count of loops you had to do is, and it's like you never made any progress at all, really. And a lot of folks point that out as a major gameplay flaw. I don't know. Anne, was that, you said you sold this, was that sort of your main gripe mechanically with the game?
Yeah, basically it was hard to play. I've actually was, just because I have that light frustration associated with it, I've not actually tried the Ranger games, although I've heard they've improved that aspect significantly. But yeah, like from a story point, I love the idea that there's a different way to interact with the Pokemon beyond just capturing them and battling them until they're weakened. Like, capture stylus is such a cool idea. And like at the time for the DS, I hadn't played a lot of games that used the stylus. Like, you could use it to press a button or something, but it was almost more cumbersome to do that than just press the buttons on your game. It was really just like this one game, I think it was called Drawn to Life or something, and then like the world ends with you, and otherwise it was like, why does the touch screen even exist? It's pointless. So this was like the first game that I picked up where it's like, well, not the first game, but like one of the first games where I really felt like they invented something that specifically like uses the stylus in some very cool ways. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. But over time, as I struggled and struggled to use it, it kind of outwore its welcome. So yeah, eventually, like when it came time to sell the games on my shelf, that was the one that went, because it was so hard to replay.
Yeah, I kind of equate it to the game of football, American football, so not soccer, but where instead of 4 downs to get to the next first number, you only have 1, and if you don't score, it's too bad. There are sometimes you can leverage, circling a Pokemon once or twice to effectively stun it and then starting a new loop. But yeah, that is mechanically one of the more annoying things there. There's a lot of other things. Like I find that this facet of it really complicates, like whenever you have multiple Pokemon you have to capture, which does come up in the later games as well, but because you have to get all the circles around each individual Pokemon, you don't necessarily have to catch them all at once, but because they move around the board a lot. I watched a speed run of this from someone who's better at the game than I, and oftentimes the best strategy was to start circling the Pokemon immediately as soon as you could before they could start merging apart. But I assume you found that, like me, those multi-Pokemon capture events were extraordinarily frustrating.
Yeah, I definitely feel like in some ways this game, like I've heard a lot of people criticize it for various reasons, or like they have bad memories of it, but I feel like a lot of that is maybe a bit blown out of proportion, but it doesn't necessarily deserve all its criticism. But like the fact that the stylus and the capture mechanism was so frustrating, I think is a genuine turnoff to this game. And like sometimes you might scratch the screen, which again, I had the problem with The World Ends With You too, but that game was fun. But yeah, this one, like there's a lot about that just basically the basic capture mechanism that I think turned people off and left a sour taste.
Yeah, and then there's like the Poke Assist, which can actually be quite useful. Like in that Ice Cave, the Steelix battle, if you use a Sneasel that you can find in there, it doubles the length of your capture line, so it actually makes it, when the Steelix is in a bit of a hole, its movement, it makes it not, but it makes it considerably easier to capture that particular Pokemon there, and that's probably the only way to do it. And speaking of only way to do it, I did beat this game on the Wii U Virtual Console. I doubt I would ever have the patience to beat it on the original hardware, given how difficult some of the later stuff in the game gets towards the end. I did manage when I went after I passed the point I passed when I originally played the game on the Wii U, and it wasn't difficult as I remembered. It wasn't easy, but did I just get lucky? And I did go back and beat that part on the actual original on the NES. But I know there's stuff in the game that I was just kind of with this. I like to say this may be mechanically or physically the most difficult Pokemon game ever released. There's probably contenders for that. And there's a couple other frustrations folks have with the game that are not directly related to that. Like there's an escort mission in this game where you have someone who is more afraid of bugs than Anime Misty, perhaps. That you have to get through a couple screens of the olive jungle to get to some equipment in there. And there's no checkpoint, so if you at any point you get touched by a Pokemon, you have to go back to the entrance. The whole thing there. I did beat that part without suspend points. I needed to use the suspend points in the Wii U Virtual Console to beat the game, but not that particular portion of it, although I did seriously consider it. There's also some other problematic areas in the game, like in one of the in the bad guy's hideout, there are some tiles that turn on and off, and if you touch them when they turn on, you get sent back to the entrance of that area, and that also has no checkpoints. But the further problem there is that some of these tile things are long enough that you can't see the clearing at the other side, so you don't know. There's a pattern to them, but you can't see it all at once until you start going down through there. So this is a game I do definitely consider. It is beatable. There are people who are quite good at it. But I would definitely say it crosses a line, I know, terrible, but into being too difficult for its own good in many places. And when that happens in a video game, there are a couple potential causes. In the 80s and 90s, they would make games extra difficult so you couldn't beat them in a rental. There are documented cases of that. I don't think that's what happened here. Other things that can happen, I wonder if the folks if there wasn't enough fresh play testing, if the people who were actually developing the game and testing and stuff just got really good at it and knowing where all the stuff was, and that sort of, made it seem like it was okay and they didn't get enough, or by the time they did, there wasn't enough time to fix or change stuff. That can sometimes happen. It's much more common, say, with small development studios. So you'd think a company like HAL or whatever would do that, or and this is far enough into the DS, they would have had maybe even some DS Lites. Definitely the original DS was well out, and they would have had real world units to test this on, or something very close to it. I don't know, but I do think this game is overall too difficult for its own good. And really the only reason I went back to it was for this playthrough. The other two games, I would say start with one of those, quite honestly, from a difficulty perspective. And I think you haven't played either of the other two, it sounds like, or not very much.
I haven't, just because, even though I know that they've improved some things, again, it's kind of like you only have so much money in your life to spend on video games and so much time to play them, and remembering just, the first Ranger game was just so hard. It's kind of like one of those, some other time, some other payday.
Yeah, I do wonder if I had kept plugging on with this game, would I have soured myself so much that I wouldn't have played the other two games? Because I did, I think I was considering avoiding Shadows of Almia, the second game, until I read that yes, they had changed the mechanics and this is better now. I thought, well, by then I was actually out in the workforce and had disposable income, so I could afford to buy it on my own dime, and it didn't seem like such a risk, or such a whatever you want to call it there. Yeah, so maybe we should talk about some of the less infuriating aspects of this game. First of all, we barely mentioned the evil team in this game, which is the Gorok Squad, which it's a bit of an odd relationship. There's the older bad guy, and I guess he has like 4 kids or whatever, or they're somehow related, I think. That are part of what's called the Go Rock Quad, QUAD, and like their dad or whatever, they're all musical, which is actually kind of cool. They have obviously their own theme song, but they also play instruments that they will whip out during like their text box scrolling through. And then they all have their goons, the low level goons that you have to fight through there. Fight is sort of they'll put some Pokemon for you to have to calm down or whatever with your styler. What did you kind of think there?
I kind of like the general idea of the Go Rock Squad, like the idea that they kind of want to be seen as heroes by creating the danger that they then save people from by like capturing the Pokemon and have Entei attack a town, and then they stop the Entei with their super styler and everyone's like, oh, you saved us. Like, I feel like I've read that comic a million times. Like I feel like it has been a Booster Gold comic at some point. Like, so there's something about that that's very like kind of hilarious and appeals to me, and I think fits very well into this world. They're definitely like the evil people, but there's something about that just initial premise of meeting them on those terms that make them seem somehow a little less scary and kind of, I don't know, lets you just again have a different experience in the Pokemon world beyond just like the big bad guys are going to capture Pokemon and take over the world experience. Like, again, there's a lot in this game that is very unique and fresh.
Yeah, and obviously the name kind of works and it kind of doesn't, because obviously the Go Rock, because there's a couple guitarists, there's a violinist, electric violin or whatever, and a drummer in the 4 admins or whatever it is. But of course the name is also kind of simultaneously quite bad, because of course in Pokemon Go we have Team Go Rocket is the name of Team Rocket in that game. So I don't know that for sure they're trying to erase it. I kind of doubt that. But they are an interesting set of characters, and this is not the last time we will see them. Although it will be the last time we see them as villains. And it's kind of interesting because especially like the 4 Go Rock Quad members they're kind of, not all musicians are like this. In fact, many of them are quite nice people, but they actually are kind of pretentious as well in some of their dialogue about, and they feel a little underappreciated at times. They've got some very interesting stuff. That's one of the best things I can say about this game is some of their dialogue is quite interesting. I guess we can talk a little bit about the post-game content after you beat the main game. It isn't quite as big as like the Mystery Dungeon games or even the main series games. There's apparently, I didn't bother with this because I had kind of lost interest after beating the main game, but you can capture like, there's a Mew you can capture. There's also actually online features that are unlocked, like this, tying into the 9th movie. There's a way you can get, the online stuff doesn't work anymore, of course, because this is the old Nintendo Wi-Fi connection that went through the DS and the original Wii, but you could get a Manaphy off of that, and eventually once Diamond and Pearl came out, you could transfer those over that way. I never had a chance to, because I never beat the game when I originally had to play the online missions. I did play some of them for at least one of the later 2 games that also had that type of stuff there. But actually, to be honest, I read some reactions on some of the post-game stuff, and some people were ticked off about some of that too. That apparently is even more difficult than some of the stuff in the main game. So I don't know.
The Manaphy mission.
Yeah, I'm not sure how far you got into any of that, Anne.
I did not beat the game. I never got anywhere near that egg. I wanted it so bad.
Well, the good news at the time was that one of the later games did give you another chance to get a Manaphy there, as did some special events. So, yeah. And, we mentioned it wasn't just the movie. There was also some tie-ins in the anime for this and some of the later games. There's also, I guess, a manga for this first one here that ties in. So not unlike Mystery Dungeon, as a side game, they really pushed this. Mystery Dungeon seems to have paid off a little bit better, perhaps because that was had fewer design issues. I mean, obviously, it's hard to see what you would do with this game without a touchscreen, but, like I said, this is on the Wii U Virtual Console. The Switch has a capacitive touchscreen, and there are touchscreen-only games for the Switch. So it's not as if they couldn't bring this back. But I think it never quite reached the heights of the Mystery Dungeon games in terms of reception and stuff like that. But we'll talk more about that when we cover the other two games in this series. But I did want to point out that they did make a legitimate push. Which, going back to the difficulty issues, I do wonder if a game with this frustration factor were released today, would we have gotten the sequels in the social media era? And I'm kind of wondering about that, but perhaps that's a discussion for another time. And any other thoughts on this game itself or anything else about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say as to what you just said about, like, whether it would have gotten the push in the social media era. It's hard to say, but, like, I definitely know that to this day, probably because of the marketing push that they did, like, when I hear Pokémon Ranger, like, my first thought isn't, oh gosh, that game that was so hard to play. Like, that's my second thought. My first thought is, oh, cool. Like, they really worked hard to kind of make, like, this idea of Pokemon Rangers and this different way of interacting with Pokemon and this different idea and approach to catching Pokemon and, like, what they did. And, like, they made that very cool. And, like, so, Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea, like, that title, you're like kind of evoked in me, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna see the Rangers. Like, when that the episodes, that two-parter special in advance where I think it's Solana, one of the Rangers shows up, like, again, that feeling of, like, oh, cool, the Rangers. Like, so there was a huge push for this idea that they could then spin off into many different directions. And I definitely think that has paid off for them, and probably is a concept that they might be able to circle back to one of these days, I think.
And we'll see if they do anything with it. I think we'll have more thoughts as we get to Shadows of Almia and Guardian Signs over the next year or so to say there. But yeah, so I guess this is one of those ones where it kind of survived its first incarnation, and we did get something better down the line. I will say that. Play one of the two other games, and the other thing I would say when we get to those, don't play both of those other two games back to back. They'll feel pretty redundant. You'll get more out of whatever one you play last if you space them out a bit, maybe as we're going through this.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's a good spot to end the recording. So thank you very much to everyone who stuck around for this. Yeah, I do appreciate, although we did get our gripes out about this game mechanically, it's definitely needed some extra polish. I do wonder if they had they may also have had a deadline to meet to get this out, especially in Japan before the movie, versus in the West where the dates were, because it wasn't getting a theatrical release for the movie, was a little more fluid there. So it's possible they had some constraints. I mean, I didn't encounter, I'm sure there are bugs in this game, but like looking at the speed run I looked at, like there didn't seem to be any known like exploits for skipping parts of the game or stuff like that, at least that he knew of. I don't know that there's a huge speedrunning scene for this game. I mean, compared to, it's no Pokemon Dash in terms of, it's probably better than that, which we said is probably another one with some real time constraints that prevented them from making a game that was probably as interesting or as good as they wanted there. So not to heap, whatever on the folks who made Dash or this game. I suspect it was a resources issue. But thank you very much for tuning in. Anna, did you have anything you wanted to say before we end the broadcast?
Well, I just kind of had a thought, like, in the same way, like, I think Dash and Pokemon Channel, we kind of talked about this, like, how, I mean, not everything you make in life as an individual or as a collective company is going to be a winner, but that it is important to try new things and to put fresh ideas and fresh, like, game mechanics and all those things out into the world. And I think it was Pokemon Dash we talked about, it might have been Pokemon Channel, but like we speculated that a lot of the things we enjoy now in a lot of very popular Pokemon games kind of seem similar to things that were tried in some of those earlier games that were not as well loved. And I definitely think like Pokémon Ranger is another one where like a lot of the things that they were trying, some successful, some less so, are things that could and sometimes have circled back around to be implemented in other ways. And that's never a bad thing. So it's like, just because we criticize some things that were legitimately frustrating doesn't necessarily mean like it's a failure and you should never try anything new because some people on a podcast are going to diss it. Like, there's a lot of good that came from this game, and even if it maybe frustrated us sometimes, probably will continue to bring good into the progression of Pokemon video games.
Yeah, I'm not aware. Sometimes when a game series gets, put to the wayside for a while, you get called a spiritual success. Will go through and create a game that is like an existing game. But sort of carries on that tradition, but with like a unique IP. I don't think I've seen something like that for Pokemon Ranger. I wouldn't even really know where to look because it does require, like, you think there must be something on mobile phones that's at least vaguely, similar with all the touchscreen stuff those have and stuff like that. But I'm not aware of anything like that. But then again, I'm not aware of spiritual successor. There are some rip-offs from back in the day of the U.S. Super Mario Brothers 2, but I'm not aware of anyone who's gone full bore and done like a full-on spiritual successor to that either. That's a massively popular game. So, I don't know. Like, you'd have to reframe the story, obviously, to make it, its own thing. That, like, there is definitely potential here, and they sort of realized it with the sequels, but even then, not completely. And maybe they weren't able to vary things up enough to make it a continuing series. They certainly could have brought it to the 3DS or the Wii U or the Switch, and they haven't. So I know the sales declined with each version, but
I was going to say, if Nintendo ever did something with like, or rather if Pokemon ever did something with like VR, this could be a really fun thing to bring back to kind of
they did. There was a Labo VR kit for the Switch, Anne.
Oh,
I have it in a closet here that I've never bothered to assemble.
Okay. I think
the deluxe kit even had a camera, and people wanted them. They wanted a new. This was before the new Pokemon Snap was announced, and then when it was announced, it's like it's got to be. And they didn't really do anything with that either. But I'm not sure where you're going with VR for that.
My thought is like I've played a lot of. I've recently played some VR games at someone's house, and like was really impressed by the interactability and like your ability to like grab things and like feel the sense of gravity and texture. I'm like, it strikes me that like to be able to enter a world where you could visually see the Pokemon, you might have better luck with the sort of the capture stylus mechanic in that kind of setting. Where you weren't physically having to draw it on your screen, but maybe just waving your hand. Like, it just strikes me like this could be an avenue for the Pokemon Company to go. It's like, I really do think Ranger there is a way for Ranger to have its day of success. And
I am now envisioning an alternate universe Pokemon Ranger Connect, but
ooh. I mean, the Connect was, maybe doesn't have the slick feeling that some of these modern games do. But yeah, like I feel there's a home for Ranger. Someday somebody's gonna find just the right medium for it, and it'll come back. I hope. I feel like there was potential here.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think they repurposed some of the stuff Kirby Canvas Curse, which is why Hal is involved on this one. Which, they were involved. That's one of the reasons the original Pokemon side games from Gen 1 especially were probably so diverse and so experimental. It's because Hal did that, has done that with the Kirby series for so long, ever since, I like Kirby's Pinball Land, Kirby's Star Stacker, which was like a breakout type game, and all the other weird, tilt. So, they had a lot of interesting ideas. I feel that's one of the reasons the Pokemon franchise is experimental when it wants to be, as it is.
Yes, when it wants to be.
All right. Well, thank you, folks at home. Hope to see you again. Like I said, next time we're going to try and discuss the sort of background deals with our deconstructed Pokemon music. All right, folks. Thanks.
Thank you.